Hey everyone, I've got another standard deck that I would like to showcase for you today. And this one really is a bit of a special one, at least for me. So it's not really a new archetype. This is clearly just a Dimir Midrange deck. But the reason why it's a little special for me is I have been experimenting with a lot of different decks the past few weeks, really the past month actually really even longer. It's really been like the past few months that I've been experimenting with a lot of different decks. And once the bans happened and this deck was revitalized, this has been the one that I just continually keep going back to. And I gotta tell you, it just feels so smooth. I feel so comfortable playing it, and I'm just winning a lot of matches with it. So when my mythic rank starts going down because I'm experimenting with all these different decks and whatever, it just starts climbing right back up as soon as I start playing this deck. I absolutely love this deck. This is one of my favorite decks that I have ever played. The reason why this video is a little special for me is because I think once rotation happens, this deck will no longer really be played. It will certainly no longer be tier 1. So in a way, I'm kind of saying goodbye to it. So I'm going to talk more about that a little bit. There's actually a lot of things about this Dimir midrange deck that I want to say, so you'll have to excuse me. This video is going to be a little bit long because there's a lot of things that I want to talk about. So firstly, I'm just going to kind of explain what's going on here. This is the deck, and then these 5 cards to the right of the lands, these are not part of my deck. These are just cards that I want to talk about. So just kind of ignore these cards for now. I'll get to them later. This right here, all these cards and these lands, this is the deck, and then along with the sideboard. And I'm not sure if you're really noticing here, but if you take a look at the cards that you see, this is not your typical deck list for Dimir Midrange. The reason why that is, this deck list for me has proven to be so much more effective. This is so much more effective. I can confidently say that this is just so much better than the usual deck list that people are playing. For example, you can see I only have 2 copies of Floodplates Drowner when most decks run 4 copies of this, right? Most decks might also run 4 copies of Cut Down. Actually, not really. But, you know, there's no Phantom Interference in here. And I think the real kind of standout thing, if you look, is this. The Faerie Dream Thief. You would be hard-pressed to find any deck in Standard that is playing Faerie Dream Thief. And moreover, you won't find Dimir midrange decks that are running this card. And truthfully, everybody is missing out. Mark my word on that. This card is unbelievable. You get so much value in this deck with this one card. There's actually a bit of a story about this card. Actually, there's a bit of a story about this deck. So just bear with me for a second. When this deck was popular about not quite a year ago, right? It was shortly after Duskmourn came out, and I think maybe after Ether Drift, but you know, not quite a year ago, a lot of people were playing this deck, but it wasn't quite, you know, super powerful at that time. It was a good deck, but it really has come into the forefront now after the bans happened, right? In this interim here between the bans and the rotation when Edge of Eternities come out, this is when this deck has really started to shine. So I did play this deck a little bit back then, but it didn't really feel quite as good as I was hoping. I did like it, but it wasn't really quite settling in. But I did have it in my mind, you know, I liked Kaido as a Planeswalker. I thought he was kind of cool. And I really like Faerie Mastermind. I'm going to come back to this card in a minute. But it wasn't really feeling quite so good for me. Then when the bans happened and all of a sudden this deck just exploded, I was like, what the heck is going on here? Why are so many people playing this deck? So I decided to go back to it, and I kind of changed the build around. You know, I looked at some of the deck lists, and I was like, okay, this is what people are running, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't quite exactly the same as it was before. And I was like, I'm just going to give it a try. And I gave it a try, and it still didn't quite feel that good, but it felt a little bit better than it did before. But I was just like, man, why do people like love this deck so much, right? And then I played a match. I played a mirror match, and they dropped this card on me. Turn 1, Faerie Dream Thief. I was like, what the heck is that? I don't recognize this card at all. Look at this thing. 1 mana, a 1/1 flyer, and when it enters, you get to Surveil 1. But not only that, if it's in your graveyard, you can exile it, For 3 mana, draw a card, and you lose 1 life. This is outstanding value. And moreover, it slots so perfectly in this deck because now, guess what? Spyglass Siren isn't your only turn 1 play. See, that was a bit of a hole in the armor of this deck, you know, which is that the only turn 1 play is Spyglass Siren. And if you don't have Spyglass Siren, now you're a little bit behind, right? But with the Faerie Dream Thief, not only do you have a 1/1 flyer that can get in for damage, that can be unblockable for Kaito, you get to surveil. I'm telling you, mark my words on this, this card is being so overlooked. Everybody is sleeping on the Dream Thief. See what I did there? Everybody is sleeping on this card because what happens is this. You play this card, or if you don't have Spyglass Siren in your opening hand, you play this card and now you get to surveil, which is basically just like a map token. It's literally like the same exact thing that you do. It's the same kind of value. And more importantly, the reason why Spyglass Siren is such an important, the perfect 1-drop for this deck is because you get a 1/1 flyer that seemingly can't be blocked for when you play Kaito, and then you get this map token. So if you don't have a land, you know, your 3rd land, you could potentially go find it, right? Or you can pump up your Siren if you don't have a turn 2 play, right? That's what why the Siren's so valuable. But guess what? The Dream Thief is basically the same thing. You know, and then you return your Siren to your hand, you get another map token with Kaito. But again, Dream Thief is the same thing. And now, if your Siren has a +1/+1 counter on it, you can just return the Dream Thief instead, and you still keep your 2/2 flyer. And now you get to replay the Dream Thief and you get to surveil again. I cannot talk enough about this card. And not only that, there is so much synergy here. Because if you have a map token that you want to crack, well, am I going to hit a land? Am I going to hit a non-land? What do I want? Do I want to get a land or do I want to get a non-land? Well, before you crack the map token, play Faerie Dream Thief and find out. Find out what is there. Is it the land that you want? Okay, crack your map token, put that land into your hand. Or do you not want a land because you want to try to pump your creature? Okay, look and see if there's a land. All right, I'm going to put that in the bin. Or, hey, there's a non-land card in there. I'm going to keep that there, and I'm going to make sure that I can pump my creature. And then after I pump my creature, now I can decide if I want that non-land card or not. I could talk forever about this. This card is so good, and you're going to see it. You're going to see it in the matches. This Dream Thief is phenomenal. It is so much value in this deck. And more importantly, it's just another way to get damage in, because really, even though everybody plays this like a mid-range deck, including myself, it's a little bit aggressive. It's a little bit more like an aggro deck, because really what you want to do, hopefully, is every turn, get another creature, get in for damage, get in for damage. The damage ends up scaling up because so many of the creatures are flying now, right? With the Dream Thief and the Siren, these are flyers. The Faerie Mastermind, this is a flyer, right? The flying is so important to just be able to keep getting in for damage, right? Make it unblockable so Kaito can come in. Seriously, I have no idea why more people are not running this Dream Thief, and I am so, even though I lost that mirror match against the player who was using it, I am so thankful for that player because I got to add it in this deck, and this deck is just so much stronger because of it. It is so much better. I enjoy playing it so much more. So I actually owe that person a lot of gratitude. So, a couple other things I want to talk about here. Again, you notice how I only have 2 copies of Floodpitch Drowner. Floodpitch Drowner is great. You get to stun something. It's got flash. It's got vigilance, right? All this stuff. But it doesn't have flying. Again, I think a lot of people are missing the point with this deck. It's another reason why I don't have Cecil in here. Again, I'm going to come back to that. But the flying is so important because aside from Floodpitch Drowner, all these creatures, right, and Tidebinder, and Curiosity, I guess, but really the main things that you're attacking with are flyers because you can get in for the damage. It's so important to just do a little bit of damage each turn, a little bit of damage each turn, a little bit of damage, and then all of a sudden your opponent has less than 10 life and it's like, wait a minute, can I win on this next turn? You know, that's how it works. So that's why I only have 2 copies of the Floodpitch Drowner. This is mostly to tap down reach creatures. That's why it's in here. Or to like tap down an aggressive, like if I'm going up against an aggressive deck, right? That works too. Or tap down something that could potentially hit Kaito, right? That's why I have them in here. To go in that same vein, Plume Creed Escort. I have no idea why people are using the Saiba Cryptomancer instead of the Plume Creed Escort. Makes no sense. The Plume Creed Escort is so much better. It's a 2/1 flyer for 2 mana. It has flash and it gives something hexproof. This has flash and gives something hexproof, but it ain't flying, and it's also only a 1/2 if you back it up, or you can pump one of your other creatures. Seriously, the Plume Creed is so much better, and it's not actually rotating out. And again, I played a match. I had the Cryptomancer in here before, but I played a match against somebody else, and somebody had the Plume Creed, and I was like, what is that? That is just so much better. It's a flyer. It can get in for damage, it has flash, and it gives something hexproof. These two things have been fantastic additions for this deck. On top of one more addition to this deck, which this is a unique thing that I have added. I haven't seen anybody in here, but I added a copy of Elvira. Look at this thing. 2 mana, a blue and a black. It has flash, it has flying, it's a 2/2. Great, exactly the kind of creature you want in this deck. But whenever another Faerie you control enters, each opponent loses 1 life. Well, with the Faerie Dream Thief, that's 4 fairies, and Faerie Mastermind is also Faerie, and if I have a copy of Faebloom Trick, there's a lot of fairies in here. I am not exaggerating when I say Elvira has literally won me games, because I will drop her, and then I will play my Faebloom Trick and do 2 damage to my opponent, or I will drop my Faerie Mastermind, do damage to my opponent, and now I have 4 more power in the air. This card has been fantastic, but because it's legendary and because it's a blue and a black, I'm only running 1 copy, which does seem to be correct. I also do have to sideboard it out if I'm going up against more aggressive decks, or typically if I'm on the draw, I'll also sideboard her out then because I need to be a little bit more controlling. But man, people are missing out. They are really missing out between the Dream Thief and the Elvira, the Plume Creed. These are the things that this deck has really needed to just be even more consistent, even more powerful, and more importantly, even a more aggressive, right? More aggressive to get more damage in. Then I have Tidebinder in here. This card is phenomenal. It's certainly main deck worthy because it has flash, and that's such a key thing about this deck is that so many of the creatures have flash, and then there's all these instant spells. So when you're sitting back, your opponent doesn't know what you're planning. Are you planning to play a creature? Are you planning to play a counterspell? And that's another thing with the spell stutter in here. Instead of the Phantasm Interference, I have a lot of fairies. I have 9 fairy creatures in here, and then potentially more with the Faebloom Trick. So if I play this spell stutter, you're probably going to have to play 3 or pay 3 and potentially pay even more than that. This, again, the fairy synergy in this has just made the deck so much better. I personally am not running 4 copies of Enduring Curiosity. I found that when I had 4, it was just I was getting them when I didn't want them, and there are enough ways to dig through the deck between Faerie Dream Thief, right, the the X factor of this deck, and Kaido, right, and then the card draw and all this stuff, the map tokens and everything. So I found that I can get to the Curiosity when I need to. It's also why I'm only running 2 copies of Restless Reef, because tapped lands in this deck just don't work. They don't work. You don't want to be playing tapped lands because you need to get aggressive early. You need to play your creatures. You need to play your spells, right? You can't be having a lot of tapped lands. So having 2 as the limit has felt like the best to make sure that I keep getting in that I keep making plays early on in the first like 3 turns of the game. So I'm going to talk briefly about the sideboard, and there's just a couple of usual things in here. You know, 2 copies of Spell Pierce. This is mostly for like Insidious Roots, or potentially use a Cauldron or something like that, or any other deck that's trying to get ahead early with not like equipments, right? Stuff like that. Ghost Vacuums, of course. Disdainful Stroke, Negate. These go in pretty often against control decks or whatever. Anoints. These are going to be heavily missed when rotation happens. Shoulder's Edict, same thing. Another copy of Faebloom Trick. This is, again, just if my opponent's playing a lot of reach creatures and I need to tap them down. Blot Out. This is mostly for the mirror or for roots against Tyvar and stuff like that. And then 3 copies of Preacher just as really good blockers against either decks that go tall or decks that start aggressive early, right? So pretty standard sideboard. What I'm going to talk about now is why I think this deck is not going to be viable after rotation. Why I pretty much think it's not going to be a tier 1 deck, and really, I just don't see it being able to keep up with all the awesome new synergies that are coming. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just separate the cards that are rotating out. I'm going to put them right here between the lands and then the other cards that I want to talk about. So these are the cards in the main deck that are rotating out. There's obviously more in the sideboard, you know, the Annoyance, the Shoulder's Edict, the Blot Out, right? But if you just look at this is actually a lot that this deck is going to be losing. And not only that, the two best cards in this deck are certainly Kaito and Enduring Curiosity, but the third best card in the deck, Faerie Mastermind, aka Yuta Takahashi, one of my favorite MTG Pro players. I'm really glad that he won that World Championship and got to be featured on a card. He's definitely one of my favorite players. But seriously, losing Faerie Mastermind this deck is gonna take such a hit, because the flash, the 2/1 flying for 2 mana, and more importantly, the passive card draw, man, I'm telling you, like, there are other potential replacements. You know, I kind of have a few of them over here, which would be Malcolm. You know, some people have been saying you can play Malcolm in place of Faerie Mastermind, but the thing is, for one thing, Malcolm is legendary. So you can't have multiple copies of him on the field. And not only that, he's not a fairy, so he doesn't have the fairy synergy at all. And really, it's just not as effective, man. Like, you get to... If Malcolm was more effective, people would be playing Malcolm instead of Faerie Mastermind. Malcolm's not as good. You know, it's... Sure, you get to potentially draw a card and discard a card if he does damage, but the passive card draw of Faerie Mastermind, if you're going up against an opponent who draws cards, is just so valuable. It's going to be so missed. It is having to be like active with your card draw, you know, having to do damage to do it. It's just not the same, man. It really, really isn't. Plus, returning Malcolm to your hand and then having to replay it, and now you can't do combat damage, whereas you can just replay a Faerie Mastermind and have it passively draw you cards. It's really just not the same. And obviously, you know, Plume-Cleat Escort is also a 2/1 flyer for 2 mana, but again, it's just... If Plume-Cleat Escort was better than Faerie Mastermind, people would be playing Plume-Cleat Escort. That's not the case. Losing Faerie Mastermind is going to seriously hurt this deck a lot. This card is so important. The only other card that is marginally close is like Spectral Sailor, because this is a 1 mana flash flyer, but it does have this passive or this active ability to pay 4 mana to draw a card, which is very similar to Faerie Mastermind, right? But again, it's not the passive card draw, right? It's not the passive card draw. And as far as I know, I don't think there's anything releasing in Edge of Eternities that can replace Faerie Mastermind. Maybe there is. Maybe there is like a 2 mana flyer that has a similar effect, but it's the flash though too. It has to be something with flash, because being able to hold back and cast this card when your opponent is casting a draw spell, and then you can play this in response. Dude, seriously, this deck is just not going to perform as well without Faerie Mastermind, unless there's a very close equivalent substitute in Edge of Eternities, and I don't think there is. Additionally, you know, you're losing this great removal. You're getting Tragic Trajectory in the new set, and Tragic Trajectory is a card that does fit pretty well in this deck, because with Kaito, well, that is a permanent leaving the battlefield, right? So now seemingly with Tragic Trajectory, you can -10 something. But that's not really how you use Kaito in this deck, because you use him on turn 3, ideally. And then you've used all your mana, and now you can't cast Tragic Trajectory anyway. So I don't really see Tragic Trajectory being an equivalent substitute, and furthermore, Tragic Trajectory is a sorcery, not an instant. It's not going to be an equivalent replacement for Cutdown. Losing Cutdown is absolutely huge. Losing Go for the Throat, there's not an equivalent replacement for this either. You know, there's like Bitter Triumph, there's Shoot the Sheriff. There's also Feed the Cycle. All right, Feed the Cycle could potentially be something with Malcolm, because if you're discarding cards, then it allows you to forage, right, to pay the cost for Feed the Cycle. Actually, here, let me go get Feed the Cycle. So here's Feed the Cycle. You know, and you can you might be able to forage if you have Malcolm, because you're discarding things, but still, man, just losing the Go for the Throat, losing the Cutdown, losing the Shoulder's Edict, losing the Annoyance, it's rough out here. And really, I think the kind of elephant in the room right now, the lands. Even though we're gaining Watery Grave, it's not enough, because you're losing 2 Dimir lands here. And Starting Town is not an equivalent replacement. Starting Town is not an equivalent replacement, because Starting Town is both a fast land and a pain land in one. See, the nice thing about Dark Slick Shores is that if you get it early, great. It comes in untapped. And then you don't have to pain yourself to pay the mana, right? If you get it later, then you could potentially discard it. Now, the nice thing about Underground River is that while you have to pain yourself, if you get it later, you can still just tap it right away. Starting Town is literally both drawbacks in one card. This is not an equivalent substitute. It just doesn't work. This maybe works better in like 4-color decks, you know, some 3-color decks, but in a 2-color deck, this is not an equivalent substitute. So really, even though we're getting Watery Grave, it's not enough. It's not enough. Like, it's not enough to replace losing both Dimir lands. Now, some of these decks have been running Cecil, which I do think is an effective card here. And with Watery Grave, it could potentially bring you closer to 10 life for this to transform. But again, man, when I play these mirror matches and my opponent has a Cecil, I usually win. And the reason why I usually win, Cecil is legendary, so you can't run more than 2, maybe 3 copies of him. And again, he doesn't have flying. So you can just block him, and now you can't ninjutsu in Kaito. Later on in the game, he can still just get blocked, you know, so now you can't get in for that final amount of damage that you need to finish off your opponents. The flying, man, is so important. It is such an overlooked aspect of this deck. It's a twofold thing, because you want to be able to get in for damage, because you need to keep incrementally doing 2, 3, 4 damage to your opponent every turn to eventually win, but it's also curiosity. Right? You have to do damage to your opponent to trigger curiosity. And guess what? With Cecil, even though he has Death Touch, if your opponent just blocks, that's 1 less curiosity trigger that you get. And now you're not drawing your card. This deck is just losing a lot when rotation happens. And I don't see how. I don't see how this is going to remain a tier 1 deck unless there are some flash creatures, some flying creatures that are coming in Edge of Eternities that I haven't seen yet. Because otherwise, you know, Azorius Artifacts is getting really strong. Mono Black is getting really strong. Orzhov is getting really strong with the new cards that are being added. Green is getting a lot of really good stuff. I just don't see how this deck remains tier 1, losing so many important pieces. Now, another thing that I like about this deck, in addition to the synergies and the way that it plays, is I think it's a bit of a grounding aspect that amidst all these decks that do all these crazy things and have such insane value, like Insidious Roots, VV Cauldron, right, the unit decks and all this stuff, all these decks, the dinos, right, all these decks that do all this insane stuff, here is just this normal deck. Just this normal deck that doesn't really have a gimmick, aside from, I guess, the ninjutsu. The ninjutsu is a bit of a gimmick, right? But otherwise, this is just a normal deck that just does normal things, and it's just a really efficient, high value, high synergy mid-range deck that excels. It excels amidst all these decks that are doing all these crazy things. I just love that. I don't like the direction that Magic has taken lately, where there's these insane cards with all these insane effects and all these insane synergies and these insane value engines and this everything, you know, the synthesizers, which is only getting stronger after the new set comes in, right? You know, these decks that just seemingly never run out of gas and they just snowball so quickly. Here is just this nice, stable mid-range deck that just plays Magic the way it's meant to be played. There are some instant spells, there are creatures that work together, and it's just getting in for damage, right? There's just a synergy here. It's just a normal value mid-range deck. It feels like home, because I'm a bit of an old school player. You know, I started playing Magic over 15 years ago, and I haven't really admittedly kept up. I've really gone in and out with Magic, you know, played on and off a lot, but I just don't like the direction that it's gone lately. And just having this deck that just feels like playing an old school deck, you know, even though it's got new school tricks to it. So that's another reason why I'm really going to miss it a lot. So there are just a few final points that I want to make here. Firstly, if you are a Dimir mid-range player, and you know, there aren't that many days left here in the rank season, but if you're trying to obtain a certain rank, like maybe you're in Platinum and you're trying to get to Diamond, or you're in Diamond and you're trying to get to Mythic, if you're a Dimir mid-range player, run this deck list. Just trust me. Run this deck list right now. It is nice that, look, another thing about this deck that's really awesome, it doesn't have that many rares outside the lands. Isn't that cool? Like, that's another thing that's so cool about it. Again, amidst all these decks that have so many rares and so many value engines and all this stuff, it's like just Kaito, a couple Tidebinders, a few Curiosities, Faerie, Mastermind. That's it. Everything else is common and uncommon. And then you just have the rare lands. So if you enjoy playing Dimir Midrange and you're trying to close out the season on a high note and get to a higher rank, just trust me, craft this deck list right now. You have to just take my word on it. Try to recognize, the synergies here. You want to kind of play things in a good order. If you have Spyglass Siren and Faerie Dream Thief in your opening hand, play the Siren first, then play Dream Thief. Or if you have Kaito coming up, take back the Dream Thief and leave whatever other creature is there and then replay the Dream Thief, right? And then the sideboard, this sideboard has proven really effective. I'm missing a couple things, like I don't have a Strategic Betrayal. That's something that you could have in here. But really, this sideboard has been working pretty well for me. And you're going to see it, in the matches that I have played. So just trust me, just take my word on it. If you're trying to rank up during these last few days of the season, you're trying to close out on a high note, and you are a Dimir Midrange player, just make this deck list. Because you should have all of the rares and mythics that you need. All you have to do is craft some uncommons and commons. And I hope that somebody comes back to this video in a few days and says, hey man, I did what you said, I made the deck list and I ranked up and I finished at this rank. I really hope that happens. That would just make me really happy. Now I do apologize for the length of this video. I have 4 matches that I want to show you. Because really, again, I think I'm saying goodbye to this deck, and I just love this deck. I'm gonna really miss it a lot. So the reason why I have this video so long and why I have so many matches is a little bit for myself too, because I think in the future I'm gonna want to kind of come back to this video and have a little bit of nostalgia over this deck, because I don't think it could even just be done. I don't know if it's ever going to come back. Again, I apologize for the length of this video, but I hope you appreciate my detailed explanation here, and I hope you enjoy the matches. All right, so here's my opening hand for the first game of the first match. And it's a little bit interesting, I'm on the draw, and I was initially thinking to mulligan this, but that Faerie Dream Thief, with having the mana to be able to cast it, I was actually thinking, well, I'm on the draw, so I could potentially draw a land, and now more importantly, I can try to surveil for a land. So, turns out that there's a land on top anyway, but really, this Faerie Dream Thief, like I was explaining, really showing its value here, even though it gets torched right away. That opening hand was absolutely not a hand I could have kept without having Faerie Dream Thief. Faerie Dream Thief was the key piece there to allow me to keep the, well, on top of being on the draw. I wouldn't have kept it if I was on the play, but. So now that my opponent has used a Torch the Tower, I can seemingly run out Faerie Mastermind, and look at this, I drew my 3rd land off the top as well. But I'm not going to ninjutsu Kaito in, because this is obviously some kind of big creature deck here, and I wanted to hold up Tidebinder. And look at this, it's a really good thing that I did, because they played Dragonhawk. So this was a Temur Dragonhawk deck. If you're not familiar with this deck, the Dragonhawk is the key piece as to how this deck wins and how the combo actually starts. So holding Tidebinder there was extremely important. Now you notice how I didn't draw a 4th land. So now I seemingly have a lot of options. I can play Spyglass Siren. I can ninjutsu in Kaito. I could even, leave up, go for the throat and all this stuff, right? But what I was actually thinking is, I've already dealt with 1 Dragonhawk, and the Dragonhawk is the way that this deck actually wins. And if my opponent plays a 2nd Dragonhawk, I need to have an answer. And I do have an answer, because I have a 2nd Tidebinder. So actually, it's a little bit weird, but I decided to just not really do anything here without having that 4th land. If I had the 4th land, I would run out the Spyglass Siren, but without that 4th land, it was too important for me to hold up Tidebinder, because that's like the only way that my opponent could essentially win this game from this point forward, is just playing either a Dragonhawk or just another really big, intimidating creature that has an ETB effect. So, nothing happening from the opponent. I can at least go for the throat this Dragonhawk, because now my Tidebinder can attack. Again, no fourth land, so drawing Faerie Dream Thief is, that's a good card, and Spyglass Siren's a good card, but I'm too apprehensive to make a big play here without being able to hold my trump card, Tishana's Tidebinder. It is so important because I know that my opponent can just come right back if I don't have an answer. So, turns out my opponent didn't play anything. And now I'm thinking that, well, maybe I could run out this Plume Creed because seemingly they're not really doing anything, right? So now this is just a little bit more damage that I can get through. And look at that. I finally got my fourth land. So now I can certainly attack. And this is a good amount of damage. Now after this attack, my opponent's going to be down to 4 life. And I can make the map token. Again, I'm not going to crack it because I want to leave up to 3 mana. So the fact that my opponent whiffed a little bit the past few turns was really important here. But still, I am holding up the Tidebinder as the answer. And my opponent just scoops. So there you go. From having only 1 land in the opening hand to actually winning the game. Pretty awesome. So sideboarding that, again, if you're not familiar with this deck, it doesn't see quite as much play as other decks. But basically, the Dragonhawk has the win condition. Typically, these decks will put out like Temur Battlecrier and then a Roaming Throne and a bunch of other big creatures and stuff to try to have a big board and then trigger the Dragonhawk with creatures power 4 or greater. That's how it works. So I'm trying to figure out what to do here. Cut down didn't seem like it would be very useful since literally the only target for cut down against this deck is Llanowar Elves. So I had no other targets for it. And then I put in another Faebloom trick because Dragonhawk does trigger when it enters, but it also triggers when it attacks. So I can at least seemingly stop it from attacking if I have a Faebloom trick. And then a couple copies of the Preacher, because at least Preacher will be able to block and kill the big 4-power creatures that my opponent is seemingly going to be playing. Opening hand for game 2 is not as good. I don't really have a lot of early action here. There's Llanowar Elves. I can at least start with the Restless Reef, but then I don't really have too much going on. So I did consider mulliganing that, but I just wasn't sure how much better something would get here. So you notice how I have a few options here. One, my opponent is tapped out, so I can play the Spyglass Siren and activate the map token, and it won't get burned. But I didn't decide to do that because I thought that my opponent was going to run out the Trailblazer, and then I could try to draw a card off it with Faerie Mastermind. But that's not what happened. So my opponent just played Esper Origins instead. So my opponent did not play a 4-power creature along with the Trailblazer, so I am not going to be able to draw a card off Faerie Mastermind. I decided to try run it out anyway, and it's just going to get torched. So I think that was a bit of a mistake on my part. I don't think I should have played the Faerie Mastermind there. I was obviously playing it because I was thinking I can attack with Kaido next turn, but I still think it was a mistake. I think it would have been better to hold it back and then wait for that Trailblazer to come down and then have a window where I could activate trigger the ability so I can draw a card. I was very surprised, though, that my opponent didn't play like a Temur Battlecrier or something alongside the Trailblazer, because then I would have just played the Faerie Mastermind, but that's not what happened. So now I'm in a bad spot. My opponent gets to play the Trailblazer. They get to play the flashbacked Esper Origins, which is now going to be a 4/4 creature. They get to draw a card off it. So I'm already like way behind. And it's also a Mistrise Village. Look at that. I don't have a lot of options here. Having a hand with 4 lands and only a few answers that aren't really particularly helpful right now is not looking very good. I can at least play a Faerie Mastermind when my opponent plays another big creature, which will probably be the other flashbacked Esper Origins, so then I can at least draw a card. But otherwise, I'm in a bad spot. I did really consider mulliganing this opening hand that I had because, again, I didn't really have too much to deal with my opponent's stuff. Having Curiosity and Kaito are like my 2 best cards, but they just didn't answer what my opponent was going to do. Here comes the Esper Origins, so I'm going to run out the Faerie Mastermind. You notice how my opponent doesn't have any access to red mana right now. So I can play the Faerie Mastermind without it getting torched. see what they get from the top here. And it is another Trailblazer. So I at least get to draw a card, which is a Shoot the Sheriff. So that's actually pretty good. They run out a World Wagon. And my opponent's just building a really big, intimidating, stompy board, and there's really not much I can do about it. I think in retrospect, it might have not been a bad idea to block with the Spyglass Siren there. It would have prevented 4 damage, and next turn everything's going to have trample because of the Esper Origins going away. Unfortunately, drawing a second Kaito there off of the top, and I was debating cutting one of the Kaitos, which I usually do when I'm on the draw, and I probably should have. I probably should have put in like one more removal spell or something. Or like a Disdainful Stroke. Or I think I did put in the Disdainful Stroke, but still, I could have had one more thing instead of that Kaito, that second Kaito. So what I'm thinking of doing now is attacking with something, and then leaving back a blocker, and then I can ninjutsu Kaito in to stun something, and then I can kill something else with Shoot the Sheriff. That seems like my best option, which, frankly, isn't great, right? I'm just in a really bad spot this game. My opponent has curved out extremely well. Ninjutsu in one of my Kaitos. Get in for 3 damage, not that it matters too much. And then I'm going to stun something. So I'm not going to stun the Esper Origins that's about to go away. I'm going to stun the Trailblazer, and then I can at least kill something. I can kill the World Wagon, I can kill the other Esper Origins. Temur Battlecryer comes down. So I'm thinking, well, they're probably setting up for something. I do at least get to draw a card off this. I drew another Faerie Mastermind. They're going to run out the other Trailblazer using only one of the greens because Temur Battlecryer makes everything cheaper to cast. 1 less to cast for every creature you have power 4 or greater. I did debate running out the second Faerie Mastermind here because then I would draw another card. But it just did, with this intimidating board staring me down between the World Wagon and the Esper and everything else, I just didn't think. I think I wanted to hold up the removal spell. Everything's got trample anyway. At least everything that's going to attack. Draws another card. Puts out some mana. And look at my opponent's going to do now. They're going to play a Roaming Throne. So I can feel what's happening, right? I can feel what's happening. Like, oh man, now it's Dragon. So now when Dragonhawk comes out, it's going to trigger twice. And they get to draw another card and another card. I was a little confused by the Caravan, but they can play it for free. I'm not sure if you noticed, but they did play the Roaming Throne for free as well because they had 4 creatures with power 4 or greater. Now they're going to crew the Caravan because that's another creature with power 4 or greater. And then they're also going to crew the World Wagon because that's another creature with power 4 or greater. And look at this. They're going to play a World Wagon using one of the manas that was in reserve. And then they're going to end up crewing this as well. So they're just building a massive board here. And they can basically do all this for... they hadn't even played a land yet. So now they're going to crew the World Wagon. And then you notice how they tapped the Mistrise Village, so I couldn't even counter that Dragonhawk if I wanted to. Isn't that nuts? So that was actually really good sequencing by my opponent. It was very impressive. That was very, very good sequencing. They got to play out basically a bunch of creatures in their hand and then also make their Dragonhawk uncounterable. So that was really impressive. It was a really good sequence for my opponent. So now that I'm on the play, you know, I don't think I'm going to cut a Kaito like I might have done when I was on the draw. I typically do still run the 4 Kaitos when I'm on the play because it's more likely I'm going to get him out there on turn 3. Especially with my opponent's deck is a little bit slow. I mean, once it gets going, it just really, really gets going. But it is a little bit slow. You know, it's not really until like turn 3, 4, really turn 4 when it kind of picks up. So I didn't really change my sideboard because I was thinking, well, I don't really know what else I would do here. You know, my Anoint with Afflictions only work on a few things. And the main thing is a Dragonhawk, right? As long as I can counter that Dragonhawk and kind of hope that my opponent doesn't make a really big board like that again, right? But they just curved out really well. This opening hand's pretty good. I have a Spyglass Siren. I can potentially map token for my third land. And I drew the third land anyway. So now I did consider using the map token because, you know, no access to red mana off of the tapped land, but I decided not to. My opponent's going to Esper Origins here. Means I can play Faerie Mastermind for free without it getting torched. So now I can swing for potentially 3. And I did consider not doing the ninjutsu, but I was like, there's nothing on turn 3 that I'm necessarily scared about to hold up Spell Stutter. So it seemed better to run out Kaito. And now I'm going to Surveil to make sure I get my 4th land. And look at this. I got to shoot the Sheriff and a Restless Reef. I would have really preferred that I had found an untapped land down there. And to shoot the Sheriff, I was like, man, am I really going to let this go? You know, because I was thinking I have the Spell Stutter. Maybe the Spell Stutter is enough. But I wasn't sure. So, you know, I really wanted to find an untapped land. I debated just putting both of these in the bin. But if I put both of them in the bin and then I don't find a land at all, that is not ideal. So, but I was considering not taking the Shoot the Sheriff because I did have Spell Stutter, but I decided to take it anyway, just as a little bit of added security, because now I can play Spyglass Siren on the next turn, play my Reef, and then I can leave up mana for either Faerie Mastermind or Shoot the Sheriff. So my opponent did plot the Trailblazer. So seemingly they're going to do something next turn, like run out the Esper Origins and the Trailblazer. And then I can play my next Faerie Mastermind. So I decided to Surveil again, and seeing Go for the Throat and Feybloom Trick was not ideal either. I was still looking for an untapped land. And I didn't really need the Go for the Throat since I had Spell Stutter and Shoot the Sheriff in my hand. And I wasn't sure about the Feybloom Trick either, because I was thinking, well, it does give me 2 fairies, and I can get it for 2 more damage. But ultimately, I thought I have enough things to kind of like do. And look at that, I drew my untapped land anyway. So now I'm not going to play the Spyglass Siren. I'm going to hold up all of my instant stuff. My Faerie Mastermind, my Spell Stutter, and Shoot the Sheriff. So they played the Esper Origins first, which I was a little bit surprised about, that they didn't play the Trailblazer first. I kind of figured, you know, what are they doing? Like, why would you not just put the Trailblazer down and draw a card off the Esper Origins? I do have a Faerie Mastermind on the field, so maybe they were like, well, I don't want him to draw a card, right? Which makes sense, but at the same time, you know, my opponent gets to draw a card as well. So maybe they were just kind of waiting until they could play Torch the Tower to burn my Faerie Mastermind. And look at this, they binned a Dragonhawk. So if they're binning a Dragonhawk, they must have one in their hand. They get a Surrak Elusive Hunter. And I decide to just shoot this Esper off the field so that they don't get the extra mana. And then I get to play another Faerie Mastermind for free. So now I can get in for a lot of damage. I guess actually maybe they were just looking for their 5th land. Maybe that's why they binned the Dragonhawk. But I saw them bin that Dragonhawk and I was like, oh, they must have another one in their hand. But it's fine because I have Spell Stutter, right? And I have 2 fairies on the field, so that they have to pay 4 mana to cast that spell. So now I have a lot of options. I can get aggressive by plussing Kaido. I was apprehensive to play the Reef, but I was like, you know, because I would like to find an untapped land, right? But I decided, no, let's get aggressive. Let's plus the Kaido. And I was also thinking my opponent is tapped out. I can use the map token to plus a Faerie Mastermind potentially and get in for even more damage. So that's what I decided to do. And look at that, it's Disdainful Stroke. So I'm certainly going to leave that on top. And now my opponent's down to 4, so that was a big turn for me. Play the Reef, play the Spyglass Siren, and now I'm just going to hold up Spell Stutter. So I felt like Dragonhawk was coming here. You know, my opponent can play the Trailblazer, and then they can add mana, and this is enough mana to play the Dragonhawk, right? They didn't do it. They played another Trailblazer. I was like, what are they doing? Right? I was so confused by what was happening here. So they play another Trailblazer. They draw two cards, but I also draw 2 cards. So I draw that Disdainful Stroke. I'm thinking, what are they doing, right? So what they were doing is they were trying to set up to remove some of my stuff before playing the Dragonhawk. So they're going to Torch my Faerie Mastermind. I'm going to Spell Stutter. And then they're going to Esper Origins again to gain 6 life, but that is not enough because I have 6 damage in the air. So that is the game. Pretty cool, right? So, interesting first match against the Temur Dragonhawk deck. Here we are with match number 2. This is a terrible opening hand, no lands. The easiest mulligan that I've ever taken. This hand is definitely good, but I was just thinking, what do I want to put back? So what I was thinking is that I can curve out kind of nicely here. So maybe I don't want that Restless Reef, because if I draw Kaito, I would want to be able to play him, right? I'm already on the play. So that's why I put the Reef back. I didn't want the tapped land. I'm hoping that I can just kind of comfortably curve out here. Clearly there's some kind of Golgari thing going on the other side, so I wasn't sure if it was roots. You know, if it was roots, it might have been a Surveil land, but could also just be like Golgari Midrange. My opponent has a cut down, obviously, so that's why I didn't activate the map token. And there it is. So they're going to cut down my Siren. Nothing from the opponent there. So I'm thinking, well, I'll just run out the Floodpits Drowner and try to attack with it. And there is a stick here as I'm casting it. So because there was a stick as I was casting it, I was thinking, do they have Sheoldred's Edict? Right? Because if they have Sheoldred's Edict, then that does stick pretty much all the time. So they're letting me attack with the Floodpits Drowner, though. And I decided to just, you know, not activate the map token or anything. They would probably just remove my Floodpits Drowner. So I was thinking that I would just wait to see what my opponent does, and I can respond. They run out of Glissa. Don't see Glissa played in many decks. So it certainly is some kind of Golgari midrange. And what I was thinking is that I can just cast Tidebinder when Glissa does damage to me. So in the meantime, I'll run out Obira because I can do 1 damage to my opponent when I evidently play my Faerie Mastermind. So I didn't want to activate the map token because I wanted to save the mana for Tidebinder. I also drew a second Tidebinder. My opponent's going to attack here. I'm not going to block. And then when this trigger happens, I'm going to cast my Tidebinder. There we go. Glissa is now just a regular 3/3 body, but they immediately cut down my Tidebinder. So thankfully I have a second one, but it does still prevent the trigger from happening. And look at this, they play a fight spell. So my opponent got rid of 2 of my things. I can at least attack with the Floodpits Drowner. And then not drawing the next land was a little unfortunate. You know, I could have activated the token, but at least I have a second Tidebinder. So rinse and repeat, just like the last turn. Same exact things going on here. Take damage. The same exact trigger happens. You draw a card and lose 1 life, and I'm going to counter it with my second Tidebinder. And my opponent does still have an instant spell. Just not sure what instant spell it is. So there's Unstoppable Slasher, which is definitely scary, but I drew Go for the Throat off the top, which I was very glad to see. And I'm pretty much thinking I should probably just go for the throat this Slasher and get in for the 5 damage, because I'm technically winning this race. So first, I can't activate the map token because if I'm going to go for the throat anyway, then I don't need the 3rd mana, or the 3rd land. And I'm certainly going to bin that Faerie Dream Thief because I'm looking for a 4th land for Curiosity. So cut that, or go for the throat, the Unstoppable Slasher. And then no play there from my opponent. And I also still didn't get my 4th land. So what I'm thinking is I can at least attack here because Glissa's doesn't do anything. No first strike, no death touch, anything, right? So regardless, if my opponent blocks with Glissa, she's going to die. So I can certainly attack with both here. My opponent's already down to 7 life. So my opponent does block. Glissa's going to die. There's going to be a trade here. And then I get my opponent down to 4. So now I can play my Spyglass Siren. And what I'm thinking is I can then play Faerie Mastermind at the end of my opponent's next turn. And then with the map token, if I plus my Siren, then I will have lethal in the air. So Smuggler's Surprise was the instant that seemingly my opponent was holding. It was not a removal spell after all. So they're seemingly doing this just to find some lands. And they did. So now I'm thinking, okay, I'll just Faerie Mastermind at the end of my opponent's next turn. And then I can plus my Siren, and then that will be lethal in the air. Opponent plays another Glissa, which is fine. And nothing else from the opponent, so I can just run out this Faerie Mastermind. There's no instant removal spells or anything. Activate this map token. Hopefully hit a non-land. I did just draw a land, right? So hopefully I hit a non-land. And of course I hit a land. That's how it goes. But it is an untapped land. So at least I can, exile the Faerie Dream Thief from my graveyard. And then I can draw another card next turn. I'm also putting my opponent to 1 life here. But that was unfortunate. I was really hoping to just end this game right there. Attack, attack. And now I do get my opponent down to 1. So they need to either come up with 2 flying blockers or get rid of both my flyers. They had neither, so they just scoop. So clearly I'm up against some kind of Golgari mid-range. And since they have Slasher, I was certainly going to put in Anoint with Affliction. Just checking the graveyard to see what else they got. I didn't see Llanowar Elves. So because I didn't see Llanowar Elves, I was thinking, well, maybe there aren't that many cut down targets, right? Anoint with Affliction certainly works against Slasher. It also does work against Glissa. But I wasn't sure here because I knew that Preacher wasn't that good because Preacher wasn't going to be able to kill Glissa because she has first strike. The Fabloom trick did seem good because then I could get more attacks in the air. And I did add a Shoulder's Edict just in case they put in a Liliana. I wasn't sure if they were going to do that or not. So this seemed like kind of my best way forward here with sideboarding. Another Fabloom trick to get more flyers in the air to do more damage, but then also tap down one of their scary creatures. And then not really much else I can do here. I could put in a Shoot the Sheriff, but I didn't want to do that because Slasher is an assassin. So he is an outlaw. So it would not work on him. This opening hand at first seemed pretty good, but then I noticed, wait a minute, I have only blue mana here. And I have 4 lands. So in order to have access to black, I need to draw another land, seemingly a swamp or something like that. I didn't want to draw a 5th land if I already had 4 lands. So that's why I was thinking, man, this hand actually isn't that good, So I decided to mulligan it because, really only having access to blue mana and then having to draw a 5th land to have access to black, that just didn't seem good. This hand is really not much better. In fact, it might be marginally worse because I can't really do much. I do have Anoint with Affliction to at least answer the Slasher and the Glissa, but no real early game plays here. I decided I'm going to start with the Restless Reef, and I didn't think it was very productive to have 2 creature lands. I drew a 4th land there. Nothing starting from my opponent. I was very happy to see the Spyglass Siren. So I'm just going to play it out, and if it happens to get cut down, which it seems like it will, then so be it. But I wasn't going to activate this map token since it did seem like my opponent had cut down. I figured I might as well save the map token and not waste it. They chose not to remove it for some reason. There's Slasher, so I can at least play Anoint. And I drew a second Restless Reef. So I was thinking here I can at least activate the map token, see what I get. And it's a Faerie Dream Thief. I did initially think that this isn't too bad to put on top, but I was also thinking, well, if I put it in the bin, then I can, you know, draw a card off it, right? So I was kind of hoping to get one of my better cards, like a Kaito or a Enduring Curiosity. So I was like, you know what? I don't think this is strong enough for right now. So now I can at least anoint the Slasher. And I figured I might as well do it now in case they have some kind of protection spell or something. Unlikely, but you never know. And look at this. It's a Phyrexian Obliterator. And I'm just like, oh, man. I didn't see that in game one. And I'm just like, what the heck am I going to do with this? My Anoint with Affliction doesn't work on that, right? How often do you see Phyrexian Obliterator in a deck? Phyrexian Obliterator is actually one of my favorite creatures of all time. A big reason for that is the original art from New Phyrexia. It is just such a cool art. It's so menacing. Really, really cool stuff. I don't like this art as much. This art doesn't look as horrific. The art from New Phyrexia is really horrific. It's really good. But yeah, Phyrexian Obliterator has always been one of my favorite creatures. Slamming for 5, not much I can do about it. And look at this, it's a second one. So now I'm just like, what the hell am I gonna do? And I mean, all I can really do is hope that I draw removal, right? That's all I can really do is hope that I draw my Go for the Throats or whatever. So for that reason, I did not play the Plume Creed. I just decided to draw a card, and I still didn't draw removal. I just drew 2 lands. So I'm in a terrible spot. I can at least block it with the Restless Reef, but then I'm going to have to sacrifice a million permanents. But I was also thinking, well, I can at least make 2 more permanents with the Fabloom trick, right? So I can tap one of these things down, and then if I have to block one, I can use the 2 tokens for sack fodder. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tap one of these guys, and I'm just going to take 5 to the face. I just really need to find a Go for the Throat. That's all I can really do. Or a Floodpitch Drowner, that would somewhat help. To tap one of them again. And they play a Summon Fenrir, so this isn't something I wanted to use Anoint with Affliction on, but I pretty much had to because I couldn't let my opponent keep building their board out. I was already so far behind with the 2 Obliterators. So now I'm just praying. Didn't get it. I got another land. So, pretty much my only option at this point is to play out a land and then just block one of the Obliterators with my Reef and then sacrifice 3 permanents, or 4 permanents, because it would be 4 damage. That's all I can do. And since that's all I can do, I figured I might as well attack with the 3 flyers. I'm going to pretty much sack 2 of them anyway, potentially even all 3 of them. But I'm in a bad spot. I'm just really like, you know, I'm just hoping, man. I'm like, well, I'm not dead next turn. That's what I'm thinking. But it really doesn't look good. Yeah, I can kill one of the Phyrexian Obliterators, and I'm just really hoping that I draw a Go for the Throat off the top. Attack with all 3. Get in for 4 more damage. Noting that my opponent still had an instant spell there. So they're going to attack. And I'm going to block with my Reef. That's all I can do. And they're going to cut down one of my tokens. So now that sucks, because that's one less thing I can sacrifice, right? Bang, bang. And I need to sacrifice 4 things. So certainly going to get rid of the token. And I was thinking, well, I don't know if I want to go down to 2 lands. But at the same time, I was like, if I do go down to 2 lands, I can still play Go for the Throat if I draw it. And then I still have a Siren to do some damage. So this was just horrible. The fact that they cut down my token was just really rough. I did decide to keep the lands and then just keep my Siren. And then look at this. It's a fight spell. So now that's it. I have to get rid of my last 2 lands and this is just over. Oh man, just completely obliterated. So, with the Obliterator showing up, I did put in Shoot the Sheriff. It won't work on Slasher, but it would work on those Obliterators, which are much worse. And I didn't really know what else to do. I figured the Faebloom tricks can still help. The Drowner can still help. But otherwise, I was just like, man, I'm just kind of hoping that that I can get enough damage through to my opponent before those Obliterators stop popping off. Tidebinder certainly works. And I decided just to, well, I wasn't really sure what to do here. I took out the Elvira, I put it back in. I did take out a Faerie Mastermind because the Obliterators have trample anyway, and my opponent might just cut down my Faerie Mastermind, and they could cut down pretty much any of my creatures, but it just did feel like I wasn't going to get that much value from the Faerie Mastermind since my opponent wasn't drawing cards. So that's why I cut one of those. If my opponent's not drawing cards, then Faerie Mastermind doesn't really... Yeah, they don't get the maximum value from that card. His opening hand's not bad. I wish that the Reef was an untapped land, but not bad. I can Spyglass Siren, and then I can activate the map token. Unless my opponent has cut down. Opponent starts with a Llanowar Waste, so certainly could be cut down. And because it was possibly cut down, I decided to play the Dream Thief first. So this is the bait, right? And look at this. My opponent does have an instant spell. And they do cast it. So they did take the bait. So that was the smart thing to do. And now I get to Surveil. And I do have my 3rd land coming up. And it will not come in tapped. So good stuff. Nothing from my opponent there. And the first thing I'm thinking is I don't want to activate this map token if they have another cut down. So, go to combat. They do have an instant spell. Attack. And no instant spell coming down there, but it was better that I didn't use the map token. So instead I'm going to play my 2nd Spyglass Siren, get another map token. And now I'm just going to wait. They tap out for Glissa Sunslayer, and I decide to just go for the Throatless right away. Because next turn, if I draw a 4th land, I didn't, but I was thinking I could play Curiosity, right? But instead, I drew a Kaito, really good, just ninjutsu that guy right in, and then I'll Surveil. Surveil and draw a card. And my opponent's already down to 14. So this was interesting. I had an Elvira and an untapped land. I was certainly going to take that untapped land so I can replay my Spyglass Siren, but I wasn't sure about the Elvira. I was like, I'm not really sure when I'm going to play this. I'm going to play Curiosity on my next turn, and it just didn't seem like, it seemed like I wanted to get like another removal spell or a counter spell or something. So 4 lands, but not all black, so you can't play Obliterator. Instead, they play a Slasher. As well as a fight spell. So I lose one of my Sirens, but now I'm thinking I could just tap down this Slasher with my Kaito. So that's what I'm going to do. I have all these map tokens and stuff too, so I have a lot of options. I can play Curiosity, I can activate my map tokens, right? But I'm certainly going to tap down this Slasher, and then I'm going to attack. But you see what I do here? I stop myself for a second. Because I was originally going to play Curiosity, but you see how I counted the lands? I was like, wait a minute, they have 4 lands. If they play a black source on their next turn, an untapped black source, then they can Obliterator and play a fight spell. So, instead, I was like, let me activate a map token. Let me try to buff this Siren. It's a Faerie Mastermind. And what I'm thinking here is I'm going to save Plume Creed Escort just in case Obliterator comes down and they play a fight spell. And then I'm going to pump Siren even higher because of the Faerie Mastermind, and then I'm going to bin the Mastermind because I don't really need it. Now I'm going to attack, get my opponent down to 8, and I'm going to save the Plume Creed just in case of an Obliterator. They play a tapped black land, and they play a Bushwhack. So seemingly no Obliterator yet. They get a Swamp. And they're going to play another Bushwhack. So I was like, you know what? I really don't want to lose my Siren here because this is a lot of damage going into my opponent. So let me give it Hexproof. And instead it forces them to use Go for the Throat on it. So still a favorable sequence for me. And my opponent wasn't dead, but they decided to scoop anyway because they were pretty much out of stuff. So really interesting game there against the Phyrexian Obliterators. Here's my opening hand for the first game of the third match, and it's pretty good. I get to Spyglass Siren, and then I have untapped lands for the follow-up. Either Faerie Mastermind or Cut Down or whatever, map tokens and stuff. My opponent's going to start with the Storm Taster's Talent. So seemingly this is a Izzet Prowess. I did debate cutting down this Otter straight away. I decided not to and just get on the board because I figured I could just cut it down on my next turn and also activate the map token. Slide a hand. And then seeing the Thundering Falls there was actually in my favor because I knew that my Spyglass Siren was not going to get torched. So now I can seemingly cut down the Otter and then also activate the map token. I could also wait though and play the Faerie Mastermind on the end of my opponent's turn. Because if my opponent plays like an Opt or something, then I can draw cards off that. So some pretty interesting options here for me. And I did decide to save the Mastermind for the draw spell. They play Stock Up instead. That is unfortunately not a draw spell. But I can at least do some things here. I can either cut down the Otter or I can Faerie Mastermind. And I decide to take the damage of Faerie Mastermind because now I'm getting in for 3 damage in the air. And then again, if they play a draw spell, then I get to draw a card. I was also thinking if I draw Kaito here, then I would just run him out and then that would just be more damage. But I didn't draw Kaito. Instead, I'm just going to activate a map token. Look at that, it's a second Curiosity. I did debate bidding that, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, you know what? My opponent's going to be drawing a lot of cards. So I should probably also try to outvalue them by drawing my cards. So I actually think not cutting down that Otter at the end of my turn was a bit of a mistake. I didn't do it because I figured I could just respond. You know, I found it unlikely that my opponent would be able to play like 4, or I guess it would be 3 instant spells to try to pump the Otter. Here comes 1, so towards the tower. I was actually glad to see that because now it meant that my Curiosity might survive for a little bit. And then my opponent stocks up, so now I can certainly cut down the Otter. So now I can play one of these Curiosities. And again, you know, I think in retrospect, it might have been better to bin the Curiosity, but I also have like 3 lands in my hand. I didn't really have much else that I could like do. So playing this Curiosity and then playing a second one did seem like I could potentially outvalue my opponent. The only thing that I think would have been better is like a Kaito. And even then. So there's Vivi. We knew that this was going to happen eventually. I'm just praying that like I don't like lose on this turn basically. My opponent's taking a while to figure out what they're going to do here. I'm just praying that like they don't pop off with this Vivi with like multiple draw spells or whatever. And look at this, they're targeting Curiosity and they're going to sack their Storm Chaser's Talon to get rid of my Curiosity. So, I think that was a good play on the opponent's part, but at the same time, I was glad that I kept the second Curiosity and glad that they got rid of their Storm Chaser's Talent to do that. So then they play an Opt. Now Vivi's starting to get big. And look at that, I drew a Go for the Throat. So now I was faced with a bit of a tough choice. Do I play my other Curiosity to draw a card, or do I just go for the Throat Vivi immediately? It felt safer to just go for the Throat Vivi. It was already growing, and, you know, it could just spiral from there. So it felt like the better option to just get rid of it. And then I can still play Faerie Mastermind in response to a draw spell. But honestly, I wasn't really feeling that confident at this point. I felt like I was behind even though I was ahead in life. They play a Planisphere, which is not so bad. Sleight of Hand, also not so bad. But unfortunately not a draw spell, so it doesn't trigger Faerie Mastermind. And then they play a Crash Through, which does trigger Faerie Mastermind because you draw a card. I also wasn't familiar with Crash Through. I don't think I had seen it really be played in other decks, really. So, but at least I get to draw a card off it. So then I drew a Feybloom Trick, which wasn't a bad draw. I figured at this point I'll just run out the Curiosity and then I can leave up my Plume Creed to give something hexproof if they try to remove something. I get to draw 2 cards. And now I'm starting to feel like I'm ahead, you know, because obviously my opponent has half the life that I do, but also I have a better board and I have pretty much the same number of cards as them. So now I'm feeling a lot more secure. I also drew a Kaido off that. So I have Feybloom Trick and a Kaido. So now I'm just waiting on what my opponent's going to do. Pretty much whatever they target, I'm certainly going to play the Plume Creed to try to keep it alive. I'm figuring that they're going to try to get rid of this Curiosity. Play Stock Up. And they play another land, so this feels like, well, they could kind of do whatever, right? So look at this, Roaring Furnace. How about that? So I wasn't sure what they were going to target here. It turns out that they're going to target my Faerie Mastermind, which I guess they just didn't want me to be drawing cards off of their draw spells, but they could also block my Enduring Curiosity with their token. So needless to say, one way or another, Plume Creed comes out to protect everything, and then I can tap their token, and then I can swing for lethal. So pretty good game 1. I am a little bit... There were moments in there where I felt like I was not, my opponent was doing better than I was, especially when they had a lot of cards and then they had the VV on the field and stuff because I just drew a Go for the Throat off the top to be able to get rid of it. So now I'm kind of wondering what to do here. Certainly Annoying with Affliction seems good because all their creatures are 3 mana or less. I wasn't sure about the Floodpitch Drowner because this wasn't a Cauldron deck. So the Floodpitch Drowner does kind of help against Cauldron because then you can tap their stuff before they can harmonize, like Winter Night Stories and stuff like that. Preacher definitely did seem like a good option because if their creatures get big, he will just kill them. And I also wasn't sure if they were going to put in a Rawl or a Ral. So that's why I put in a Sheoldred's Edict because I was expecting they could potentially put in a Rawl. And then I wasn't sure about the Spell Stutters because once Vivi gets on the field, they can kind of they can usually pay enough mana to to just pay the mana required to prevent the counterspell from going through. So I wasn't really sure about that. I did decide to put in the Spell Pierce because if it's like the early turns, then I can seemingly counter their stuff, right? Like if they don't play a Storm Chaser's Talon on turn 1, I could seemingly counter it, or the Planisphere. I did decide to cut a Kaido because this game might go a little long and I might be able to dig in and get one. And instead, I was considering putting in a 3rd Preacher. Preacher seemed like it was really good in this matchup because, again, these decks don't tend to go very wide. Now that Corey Steel Cutter is out, they tend to go tall. And Preacher doesn't care how tall you are, right? As long as you can't trample over him. So this felt like it was good. I did, I'm not sure why I cut the spell pierces there. Did I put them back in? Oh, I guess I didn't put them back in. I thought the spell pierce was actually going to be good here. So I decided to put in a Faebloom trick and then Obira. I'm not too sure about that. I think the spell pierce might have been better. But again, what I was thinking with taking those spell pierces out is that if Vivi's on the field, those counter spells where the opponent has to pay a certain amount of mana don't do anything. Because then they can just pay the mana off Vivi. So that's why I didn't do that. You know, Vivi's not a sorcery. You can just do it at any point during your turn. But even so, I think it would have been better to leave in the spell pierces. I'm not sure about taking those out. So this is a pretty good opening hand. I can play Spyglass Siren, and then I can Faerie Mastermind. I can Reef. I can Creature, right? A lot of good options. They start with the Storm Taster's Talent. Unfortunately, no cut down in my hand. But can start with this. I was kind of considering on my next turn to play the Reef and activate the map token instead of playing the Faerie Mastermind. But my opponent decided to torch my Siren anyway. So much for that idea. Drawing a Plume Creed Escort there was interesting, because now I wasn't sure if I should play the Mastermind or the Plume Creed, because if I draw Kaito on turn 3, I would rather return the Plume Creed than the Faerie Mastermind. So that's why I put out the Plume Creed, because I was thinking if I draw Kaito, I can put the Plume Creed back in my hand. My opponent's going to opt, so needless to say, the Mastermind would have been better, right? But see, my opponent was also playing around that. It was actually really good on my opponent to wait until I cast a creature or do whatever I was going to do before casting the opt, because they wouldn't play the opt if I had Faerie Mastermind on the field, right? So it was actually really smart from my opponent. They're going to torch my Plume Creed. I think at this point they might have assumed that I didn't have Faerie Mastermind, so it was also good on me that I didn't play it right away. This is easily running out Creature here, because now I can start putting pressure on my opponent, and it doesn't matter how big this Otter token gets for the most part. It's very unlikely it's going to get 4 power to kill my Creature, right? So that definitely felt like the right decision. Here comes VV, but no follow-up. So that was interesting, because now, you know, I could seemingly kill VV if I had one, right? I was very surprised that my opponent just ran it out there without having a kind of follow-up. So my opponent's, of course, not going to block. Although I was a little surprised that they didn't block with the Otter. I knew that they wouldn't block with VV, but in that situation, I feel like my opponent should have been more aware that I had 4 mana open. And if I have 4 mana open and you're playing against a Dimir deck, Curiosity's probably coming down, right? So it's probably a good idea to block with your Otter token that's not really going to be able to get through anyway. So I think that was a bit of a misread on my opponent's part. I think it would have been better to block with the Otter there so that I didn't get to draw a card. Now my opponent only has 2 cards in hand. They are going to get a spell from their graveyard. And I actually wasn't sure what they were getting at first, but then I actually forgot that they had Torch Tower in the graveyard. So they're just going to remove my Curiosity and get rid of their talent. Again, at least glad that the talent's off the field, but you know, losing Curiosity is of course a big hit. So to that end, that might have been a slight misread on my part, but I did get value from it. You know, I drew a card and I got them to sacrifice their Storm Taster's talent, right? So now look at this. I could have played the Reef, but I can also essentially play out my hand if I played the Swamp instead. But I decided to Surveil, and it's a Spyglass Siren. And the reason why I wanted to do that instead is because I could potentially activate the map token, and that's why I didn't bin the Spyglass Siren right away, because now I can pump my Faerie Dream Thief. See, this is why Faerie Dream Thief is so good with these map tokens, man. because you can just surveil and decide if you're going to activate your map token or not. So surveil, see a Spyglass Siren. I don't need it, but I can use it to pump my Faerie Dream Thief, and now I have a 2/2 flyer, and then I can bin the Spyglass Siren. Easily going to run out the Faerie Mastermind here. And now look at this. I can activate the Reef, right, and get in for a lot of damage. So pretty big stuff on my part. You know, this was a big turning point in the match here. Get in for a lot of damage and make another 1/1 blocker. Make my opponent mill 4 cards, and they lose a Planisphere and a stock up. So now my opponent's going to block the Otter. I still get in for a good amount of damage there, right? And then I have 2 1/1 blockers, and then they just scoop. So that went pretty smoothly. And I think I've also played that one pretty well, with the exception of kind of like throwing away my curiosity. Here's my opening hand for the first game of the last match. This is pretty good. So I've got a good amount of stuff that I can do. And look at that, I'm going up against Golgari Roots. So I'm really in for something. You know, Dragon Sniper is the whole thing, man. Start with the Town Greeter. I do at least have some good options here for my next turn. You know, I can leave up mana for Faerie Mastermind, or I can play Faerie Dream Thief. Drawing a second Reef there was not ideal at all. I decided to play the Dream Thief because, again, it works perfectly with the map token. And look at that, it's a Dark Slick Shores. So I'm actually thinking I do want that land, right? I would rather have the untapped land that I can play next turn. So I decide to, because again, if I draw Kaido after that, then, you know, I can play him. So again, Dream Thief and Spyglass Siren just working very well together. Using the Dream Thief to decide what I'm going to do with my map tokens. So I'm really nervous, right? I'm so nervous. I'm like, man, they could play an Insidious Roots right now if they wanted, and I can't really do anything about it. Attacking with Town Greeter. And no plays from my opponent, so I was very relieved at that. I was absolutely relieved. So what I'm thinking here is I can play the Spyglass Siren and then leave up mana for Spell Stutter. Because I do have a Faerie Dream Thief, right? Play another Spyglass Siren, get on the map token, and now I'm going to leave up mana for the Spell Stutter. I really debated countering this. But I was thinking, well, you know, they're getting a permanent card. I might be able to counter it, whatever it is, with the Spell Stutter. And look at that, they found the Roots. 4 cards deep. Otherwise, they would have drawn 2 lands, you know, the next 2 turns. And now what I also realized here is, oh man, if they play a land, which they do, guess what? They can pay the cost, right? Because it's going to be 2 mana plus 1 for my Faerie Dream Thief, and they have access to that with the Moltender. So I really, really needed to counter that cash. I really needed to counter that cash grab. So I still decided to play Spell Starter because I knew that they were going to completely tap out for this, and then they wouldn't get a plant token this turn. So that's why I did that. But yeah, I really needed to counter that cash grab. Drawing an untapped land there was not ideal. You know, I don't really need more lands at this point. I was still thinking I can at least attack, but I was debating should I activate the map token before attacking. So I decided to do it. I can get in for some more damage here because now I'm basically racing against the Roots, right? And look at that, it's another land. So pretty unfortunate here. I really needed to counter that cash grab. And look at that, it's Scavenging Ooze. So I'm just like, dude, I'm ruined. Scavenging Ooze plus Insidious Roots is just basically game over. Look at that, they have 3 creatures in the graveyard too. I don't have any creatures in my graveyard, but this is just going to gain them life and make them a bunch of plants. So I'm just way behind now, all right? I really, really needed to counter that cash grab. I can at least play Faerie Mastermind and they get in for some more damage in the air. But that's it. That's all I got. They're going to gain a bunch of life off the U's and just make tons of plants, and I drew another land. So at this point, I'm thinking, well, I'm basically screwed. If they ever attack with the U's, I can at least activate my Reef. That's something. I was also thinking, well, you know, they're going to gain life off the U's, but I can at least Fabloom Trick to tap it if they attack with it as well, and then also get a few more flyers to get in for some more damage. I left behind the Fairy Dream Thief as a blocker. In retrospect, I don't think I really needed to do that. But I was thinking if I'm going to block with something, then I would rather block with the Dream Thief, because then I can draw a card off it. But I don't think I really needed to do that here. I think I could have just attacked with it, getting for one more damage. But look at this. This is just going to get nuts. They are just exiling every creature that they can. There's the next one. Here's another plant. Insidious Roots, man. What a card. Dragon Sniper. And then they're going to mill another creature. So, this is how this is going. Dragon Sniper, really not good. Now I have to save my Fabloom Trick to tap that thing down. So my opponent does attack with the Ooze, which I was a little surprised about because, you know, I can block it with the Restless Reef. I guess they kind of figured that, you know, they have all this stuff anyway that they can just attack with, but I can kill the Ooze with the Reef, so that is an engine for them to make more plant tokens. And then I can also just chump block with the Fairy Dream Thief. Then I can tap the Dragon Sniper with the Fabloom Trick, get in for a little more damage, but then also have more chump blockers. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to block the Ooze. I was also thinking maybe I don't want to block with the Dream Thief because, again, I could potentially get in for a little more damage, but you know, I think it would have been better just to block with it at this point. But I was also kind of feeling like this is just hope. So I didn't feel like it mattered. Exiling from a graveyard, just making more stuff, widening the board. And then they play a Haywire Might. So this is awful. So I'm just like, there's nothing I can do here, man. Drawing a Shoot the Sheriff. So there's not actually nothing I can do, right? I can at least make some tokens. And then I was debating attacking, but I wasn't sure who to even attack with. I mean, look at what I'm facing, right? So I just scooped. It really didn't feel like I was going to win at that point. So against Insidious Roots, certainly I'm going to put in Ghost Vacuum. I don't have a Strategic Betrayal in the sideboard, which was definitely one that I was thinking of putting in. But I don't have one, so I think I did have it in there at one point. Flood Pitch Chowder is not going to do anything here, really. Because I was thinking it's better for me to just attack in the air. And I can tap down the reach creatures with Fabloom Trick. So I put in a Blot Out to exile Tyvar. And certainly going to put in Anoint with Affliction to exile the Ooze. Negate for Insidious Roots. And Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate. And I wasn't really sure what else. You know, Preacher doesn't really do anything. They kind of go wide. Shoulder's Edict could potentially get rid of a Tyvar, but it ends up in the graveyard and then they can just bring it back, right? So I wasn't really sure what else to put here. It would have been Strategic Betrayal if I had a Strategic Betrayal, but I didn't. So Cut Down's not going to do anything. Spellstar doesn't really do anything either because, again, they can tap for a lot of mana, right? So it's good in the early game, but then if I ever draw it when they have plant tokens, it's just like, oh, it's going to be able to pay the cost anyway. So I did decide to put in one more Flood Pitch Rounder. This is for the Reach creatures. So I figured I'm going to win this game in the air, and I need to be able to tap down or remove the creatures with Reach. So that's why I put a Drowner back in. Tough matchup. The Roots deck is a really good deck. This opening hand's decent. You know, I don't have a turn 1 flyer, but I do have my Ghost Vacuum. I did debate not playing the Ghost Vacuum right away because I didn't want it to just get removed, right? But I figured every other turn after this I'm going to be playing stuff, so I didn't really see another opportunity to really get it down. Seeing Dragon Sniper in there was really unfortunate, but maybe I can deal with it later. My opponent's going to attack. And the Roots are already showing up, so this is the easiest negate of my life. But I was thinking, man, you know, if they're playing it already, maybe they have another one. Because they just threw it out there really kind of recklessly. So I was thinking, damn, do they have another one? But at least that one's gone. And it's exiled. So, drawing Kaito is good because I can stun the Dragon Sniper. That's pretty much what my plan was going to be here. Play one of the creatures and then tap down the Dragon Sniper. They play a Haywire Might, so there goes my Ghost Vacuum. I was a little surprised that they didn't do it yet. So they're going to attack the Dragon Sniper. And look at this, they're not going to get rid of my Ghost Vacuum yet. So I figured Faerie Mastermind was, it didn't really matter, but holding back the Plume Creed in case my opponent tries to remove something. Granted, Roots doesn't really play any removal really, but still, leaving up the Hexproof felt good. So I drew an Enduring Curiosity, but I obviously can't play it yet. I have to play Kaito and I have to stun this Dragon Sniper. And then also, if I stun the Dragon Sniper, he'll still have 2 loyalty up, so the Haywire Might will not be able to finish him off. Stun the Dragon Sniper, get him for 2 damage. And now my opponent is going to get rid of my Ghost Vacuum. So I'm not really sure why they waited, but I can exile the Haywire Might in response because it goes to the graveyard, and then before the trigger resolves, I can exile it. So at least they won't be able to Agatha's Soul Cauldron a Haywire Might, right? But look at this. They play the Adept, and then they also play a Moat Sender. So the Adept is certainly a bit of a problem. And I can't tap it down because Kaito already has 2 loyalty. So that's a bit of an issue. But I did draw a second Ghost Vacuum, which was good. I do have a few options here. I can play the Ghost Vacuum. I can also play Enduring Curiosity. I did decide to plus Kaito here because if I was thinking if I play Curiosity, then he'll certainly live for 1 more turn, right? So I attack with the Faerie Mastermind, and I run out my Curiosity to draw a card. And now I have Curiosity to protect Kaito. So I think that was a good use there of my resources to not attack with Kaito, but plus him up. But unfortunately, I haven't really gotten in for that much damage yet. And my opponent only has 3 cards. I did counter the Roots and exile it, but You know, this deck snowballs really easily, so it just needs a Tyvar and another Roots. Even Overlord Belmar can really get this deck going. So now that Kaido has 3 loyalty, I'm thinking I should probably stun the Adept and then attack, because I'll draw more cards off curiosity. I decided to surveil first just to see what I was getting into here, or what was coming up. And look at this. It's a second curiosity. So I really debated putting this in the graveyard, but I was also thinking the value is just too important. Being able to have double triggers on curiosity, like with when my opponent only has 2 cards in hand, I just didn't see how they would be able to catch up to me if I have 2 curiosities. So it felt a little greedy, but I really thought that this was going to help me just run away with this game if I can just keep things under control for a little bit. So I have plenty of blockers for Kaido, so I can certainly stun the Adept since they can't activate that thing. And then I can get in for more damage and draw more cards. Like that curiosity. No blocks from my opponent there. I thought it would have been good to block with the Moltender because, look, they're taking 10 damage, right? So I think blocking with the Moltender there would have been a good idea. I draw 3 cards. So it's a Curiosity, a second Kaido, and a Blot Out. So I've actually got pretty good responses here. So I didn't want to... I was thinking that I could play out the next Curiosity at the end of my opponent's turn, but I was also thinking, I can get down this Ghost Vacuum, right? And then still leave up mana for Blot Out or Plume Creed. So a couple options here for me, really. I did decide that let me have this Ghost Vacuum. I don't really need to play the Curiosity at the end of my opponent's turn. I can just play it on my turn. It will still be tons of value. But this Ghost Vacuum is really going to stop this deck from snowballing. So I can keep up Blot Out to get rid of a Tyvar. If they draw that, I can leave up my Plume Creed if something is going to, you know... And look at that. They milled the Haywire Might. They milled the Haywire Might, which they need to get rid of my Ghost Vacuum. It's funny how that works. And look at this. They play a Roots. They played a Roots, man. So I'm not sure if they drew that off the top. I feel like they did. So by milling the Haywire Might, which would answer my Ghost Vacuum, they ended up drawing the Roots. At least I think. I think that's what happened. And then they drew an Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So now I'm thinking, I have to get rid of this Might because I can't have everything that... I can't have the Might going in the Cauldron and then they can just tap everything to you know, get rid of any other... Get rid of my get rid of my Ghost Vacuum, right? So... I also just didn't want them to be able to +1/+1 something, so just good idea to just get rid of that thing right away. So nothing happening here for my opponent, so I can run out the Plume Creed just as a way to get some more damage in. And then this was actually interesting. So I was like, I have a lot of attackers right now. And I can plus Kaido to get in some more damage, but he'll just die to Dragon Sniper, right? And I was initially thinking I could just run out my second Curiosity and draw a bunch of cards. But it also felt like, can I kill them this turn? That's what I was thinking. At first, it didn't really seem like it was going to happen, but I figured I might as well plus to Kaido anyway. And then if Kaido dies, I do have a backup. And I was just thinking, let me just get a big swing and then I'll play the Curiosity. I can't quite finish them on this turn, but I'll draw a bunch of cards, right? So, I was debating not attacking all, but it seemed like there was no reason not to. So just attack with everything. Surely my opponent was going to block the Kaito and then my flyers would live. And that is what happened. And then just block the Curiosity. And that's all they can do. And now, I was originally going to run out my second Curiosity, but look at this. Look at this. The game's telling me something. What is the game telling me? Oh, wait. I got a bunch of flyers that are untapped. Can I get lethal here? So thank you, Arena, for showing me that I can play Kaido, because I probably wouldn't have recognized that. And yes, it absolutely is. That I checked the numbers real quick. You saw me do that with my mouse. And this is 2 plus 2 plus 5, because I plussed Kaido twice. So I have 2 emblems. So that is lethal. I'm going to keep the one that is unblocked, and I'm just going to get in there for 9 damage. It's so funny how that works. So, really good win for me right there. Unfortunately, I still have 1 game to go here, and, you know, that one felt like it was a lot, but I did manage to pull it out. And I'm kind of wondering if I should change my sideboard at all. You know, again, usually when I'm on the play, I take out one of my Kaidos. I mean, when I'm on the draw, I take out one of my Kaidos, but I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do here, because my opponents, you know, if they don't have a reach creature, then I can just get in with my flyers, right? So even if my opponent's starting to build out their board, being able to get Kaido on the field early could kind of get me rolling and get me ahead of my opponents. So that's why I wasn't sure about cutting a Kaido here. I was worried about the roots, and I was considering putting in Spell Pierce, because if I have it in my opening hand, then I could potentially Spell Pierce Agatha Skull Cauldron, Tyvar, Insidious Roots or whatever. But if I don't have it in my opening hand, if I draw it later, then it's basically useless, right? So I wasn't sure about putting in the Spell Pierce. Ultimately, just keep everything the same and hope for the best. Opening hand, this is pretty good. I don't have a black source, but I can start with my Spyglass Siren. They start with a Haywire Mite, so no goes back in for me. But I do have my negate. So I'm just hoping that Roots doesn't come down here on turn 2. And it did not. It was a cash grab. And they found an Ooze, so that's kind of scary. Now, drawing a second Spyglass Siren is certainly not bad. I did decide to just pump, or potentially pump this Siren. I drew an island instead. But it did feel like that was the better thing to do instead of holding up negates. I knew that they didn't have Roots because they probably would have played it already. So they would have to draw it. And now I can Kaido on my next turn, right? So, see, this is why I left in the 4 Kaidos, because they don't have a reach creature. They just play an Ooze. And if I look in the graveyard, there's only a Haywire Mite in there. So I can attack with Kaido and get in for a lot of damage. And then I have my Planeswalker on the field. So they get rid of the Mite. The Ooze grows. But I was feeling pretty good about this. I felt like I did do this in the right sequence. It was better to activate the map token to get to confirm the land or grow my Spyglass Siren. Now you see here, I actually decided to not run Kaito out. The reason why I didn't do that is because I wanted to make sure I set up enough blockers for him. And I was also thinking that I want to see what I'm going to be drawing. And it was a good thing that I did, because, having this Restless Reef, I wasn't sure if I really wanted it. I did ultimately keep it, but I certainly wanted to at least confirm that I wasn't going to get like a second Kaido on top or something like that. So again, I think that was the better play, instead of getting a little bit too aggressive with the Kaido just right away. Again, I knew that my opponent didn't really, it was unlikely that they had Roots in the hand. I would have to draw it. So, but instead, look at this, they play Tyvar. But I get to hold up my negate, and then I get to counter that. So that was another reason why I didn't play out the Kaido, was to hold up the negate in case of a either a Roots or a Tyvar. So I'm feeling pretty good about my sequencing. Now it does feel like it would be better to play Kaido. I'm just kind of wondering if I want to play out this Reef or if I want to try to draw another land. So I attack with the Dream Thief and the Siren. I want to leave behind 1 blocker. And I decided to take back the Dream Thief because replaying the Dream Thief is really good to be able to surveil. So I typically do it that way. And unfortunately, there's an island on top, so I cannot replay the Dream Thief. I was initially thinking of binning that island, but I paused because I was like, wait a minute, I can leave the Anoint with Affliction there, and then I can pump one of my Sirens, right, with the map token. So that's why I didn't bin that island right away. I was initially thinking, well, it doesn't help me play my Dream Thief. It doesn't. I'm kind of like, oh man, am I really about to do this? You know, I was kind of second guessing myself. But that's what I was thinking. I can draw the island and then leave the Anoint with Affliction on top, and then I can just pump something with the map token. I could even pump Kaido. So this felt like the better thing to do. Draw the island, use the map token, make something bigger. I was just kind of debating what to make bigger, and I actually decided to make the tapped Siren bigger because I wasn't going to block with it, and I was definitely going to block with the other Siren to keep Kaido healthy, right? Because I knew that they were going to attack him with the Use. So my opponent plays a second Tyvar, unfortunately, but at least they don't have roots on the field yet. They didn't really get anything off the mill, and they do play an Adept. So now, as expected, they're going to send the Ooze at Kaido. They sent both creatures there, so now I'm going to block with the Siren that I did not pump up. And now I'm thinking, well, I can exile the Ooze. I can also exile the Adept, right? But I can also stun the Adept with Kaido and then play another block or whatever. I had a lot of options here, right? Like, do I want to draw cards, right? Well, I knew one way or another I was going to send this Spyglass Siren at Tyvar. That was without a doubt. But I wasn't really sure about what I was going to remove here. And I also wasn't even sure about playing this land. So I really took a moment here to pause and think. I decided to Anoint the Ooze because my opponent is tapped out and they can't gain any life or anything from it right now. So they can't really respond. And now I'm thinking, well, I can probably stun that Adept and then they won't really be able to use that either. They only have one card in their hand. I'm just checking the text, and it did feel like the right thing to do here was to stun it. That's what I did. And now I'm kind of, I'm definitely going to send the Siren at Tyvar, and I'm thinking I'll just attack my opponent directly with Kaido. So that's what I did. And then I certainly want to leave up a blocker for Kaido, because the Might can kill him, so I just run out the Dream Thief, and now I get to Surveil again. And it's an island, and I don't want that. So again, the Dream Thief, seriously, so much value. So much value from this Dream Thief. I love this card in this deck. And my opponent just scoops, right? So unexpected there. You know, the game certainly wasn't over, but hopefully those matches kind of showed you the power of this, or the synergy of this deck between, or this specific build for the Dimir Midrange. So I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm seriously, I said it a lot already, but I'm going to miss this deck a lot when rotation happens. I just don't think it's going to be as strong, and I think it might need to take on a completely different shell. So I'm very much going to miss playing this deck, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.